Thank you for joining us today for Monster's webinar on unconscious bias, pronouns, gender spectrum, and building belonging in the workplace. Today's webinar is part of Monster's ongoing series to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Megan Goulet, and I am the Marketing Director at Monster Worldwide and your host for the next 45 minutes. We're trying to keep these things a little below an hour just to make sure, just to make sure that you have a little bit more time back in your day. Again, we also like to keep these things conversational. If you couldn't hear from our banter this morning, we have a lot of fun on these webinars. We really like a nice open dialogue, so please feel free to jump in. I'll be monitoring the entire time with the Q&A section as well as the chat functionality. So it's right there on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to comment, jump in, ask questions. We're definitely going to reserve some time at the end to make sure we try to get to as many as possible. So now to introduce you to our panelists. Joining us today, we have Bob Melk. He's Monster's Chief Commercial Officer. Katrina Kibben, CEO of 3 Ears Media. And Ariel Bustamante, Capacity Building Manager at RISE, which is a program of the Los Angeles LGBT Center. So to get started, as many of you saw, before the pandemic became this household word that everyone was saying, actually, the pronoun they was the 2019 word of the year. I don't know if you knew that. I certainly didn't. Everything has seemed to be pandemic. But Merriam-Webster actually announced the noting of this rise of the singular they to refer to non-binary individuals. And what's really interesting about this, as we're kind of digging into this topic, is how words come to be and how those shifts kind of occur. So personal example, I have cousins down in Texas, y'all this, y'all that all the time. And y'all actually appeared slowly over years of unconsciously contracting you all. But non-binary they actually arose quickly. It was actually after a conscious social movement. So not slowly over time, but very fast. And this might actually explain why some people have adapted to the non-binary they more easily than others. So I'd like to turn to our panelists here. Maybe Katrina, can you share with us your experience with pronouns and how you've seen them evolve over the last few years?
I want to give two angles on that. I think there's first, historically, non-binary pronouns are not new. So if you actually go back in history, back to indigenous text, you'd see that non-binary identities existed before binary identities. And I thought that was really fascinating to kind of uncover this history, because what's actually happened is that we erased non-binary people from history by removing them from data sets, right? That little drop down that says male or female, right? Or removing them from text. And it was a factor of colonization that removed these non-binary identities. So technically, non-binary people are the OGs. We're not the new thing on the market. But personally, I think it's important to share why they matter to me, because so often we skip that part. We talk about the broad generalization of what it means to everyone, but not just for my personal experience. So I'm non-binary. I use they, them pronouns, and I grew up on military bases, which usually shocks people. So growing up on a military base, everything is a mission. You win or you lose. It's black or white. It's male or female. It's uniform, not uniform. However, that puts us in a capacity where we can lose a lot. And for me personally, I felt a lot of friction because I always felt like I wasn't enough of one thing or I was too much of another. And I didn't fit squarely in those binaries. And so for me, the first time that I experienced and I heard non-binary language and I read about it and I started to understand it, I truly started to feel less friction in every part of my life, because I realized how much that creating rules for my existence was actually holding me back. And I feel like when we know that, right, when we know that it's removing friction from existence, I think we can move forward from a more accepting place, because we all know what it means to feel safe. And I think we all know what it means to feel like you're in your place. And that's what finding non-binary pronouns has meant for me.
I love that, Katrina. Thank you so much for sharing, especially your personal experience with that too. Now, Ariel, are you also seeing companies address pronouns differently than you have in previous years?
That is such an excellent question. And the answer is yes. I think increasingly folks are understanding that including pronouns as a part of the conversation, whether it's in hiring, retention, or just general company policy, it's a good practice to have. The best thing about talking about pronouns, asking people for pronouns, not demanding, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that, but giving that space for that conversation, I think obviously speaks a lot to these DEI initiatives that are really springing up as of the past couple of years. But I think it also speaks to a larger culture shift that's happening and understanding that if we don't assume things about people, that's actually great, right? If we give people the opportunity to self-disclose, that is beneficial to everybody involved. And ultimately, from the employer and employee perspective, it creates just a much better experience. So increasingly, I think I'm seeing folks, add them to things like job applications or, here in Zoom meetings, asking folks if they're comfortable to include them in, their name or email signatures or just all these other sort of places where we can normalize it. And the neat part about it too is, as Katrina was kind of getting to, the thing about pronouns is they aren't necessarily gender specific, right? So that's the other great thing about it is regardless of what somebody's gender is, we don't know what their pronouns are. So even they, them doesn't automatically tell us something about that human being. So it also just, again, opens up conversation for us to better understand our colleagues.
Great. Actually, and you brought up a really good point, Ariel, in terms of how we're starting to evolve to include pronouns more, as you mentioned, in Zoom, email signatures, social media as well. We're seeing a large rise of it as well. Bob, from a workplace perspective, how are you seeing the increased use of pronouns?
Yeah, so like I said, I've seen on things like job applications, for example, and I think, again, for example, in the interviewing process, it's really great to be able to start off that conversation and role modeling it, I think, is a key part of that, right? So if you're part of a hiring committee, for example, going around the room, introducing yourself as we typically would with our name, with our title, or any other information, but then also including our pronouns. I think, again, a lot of people, this is a new conversation, so I want to name that for many of us, this is something that is new. The concept maybe isn't new when we think about it and we realize, oh yeah, we use pronouns, we use they, them, and theirs all day long. And consciously, again, talking about it, explicitly talking about it, and understanding the importance of talking about it is new as well. So I think that's a shift and way that I'm seeing that incorporated. And the other thing I'll say is, people think I'm kidding when I say I introduce myself with pronouns all the time, but I really do. They're on my business cards. I'm in all sorts of meetings every day. I'm in government spaces. I'm in LGBTQ+ spaces. No matter what the space is, I will always introduce myself with pronouns just as a way of including others and letting them know that I'm there,
But I love personally seeing that happen and that evolution. We actually have a stat in here that according to Pew Research survey, over a third of Americans in their teens and early 20s personally know someone who actually uses gender neutral pronouns. And this young generation, whom we're calling the emerging workforce, is likely to say that when a form or online profile asks about a gender, it should include options more than man or woman. As we're talking more about pronouns and all the different places that they're popping up, and rightfully so, we're excited to see it. Bob, do you think this logic should also apply to resumes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this is just an extension of the conversation and another way that we can ensure people feel included in the hiring process. We need to remember people come from diverse backgrounds, and if you want to demonstrate inclusivity, it isn't just about letting people know that you are a diversity or that you focus on a diversity inclusion. You really need to demonstrate your inclusiveness through the culture, and so that also means that giving folks an opportunity to pull this into their resume, giving folks an opportunity to enter it out in their application. All these points are true. Yes, absolutely.
Great. Bob also, thank you, has introduced us to Ariel, who, as many of you now know, is part of the training team at RISE. I didn't actually say what it stands for, and it's Recognize, Intervene, Support, and Empower. Ariel, can you tell us a little bit about how you help prepare organizations to combat anti-LGBTQ and bias?
Yeah, so we do a lot of work with outside organizations, right? That's the purpose of our job. And it really is to prepare other organizations to serve the LGBTQ plus population. And just in case folks aren't familiar, the acronym LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning. And then the plus denotes that there are so many other identities under the big rainbow umbrella. And so that's what that plus denotes. So we will go in with organizations and do a lot of things. We'll do things like audit policies and procedures and practices and just better understand what's going on at that organization. We'll do training, and I'm a big proponent of training, but I'm an even bigger proponent of coaching and technical assistance, because trainings are a one-off, right? It's a moment in time, and that's a great time to kind of begin or continue a conversation. Coaching and technical assistance is really where the rubber hits the road, where we're able to go in and see what's happening day to day, right? What's happening in the interview room? What's happening throughout the day with your organization to better understand how we actually apply the principles. So the thing about anti-bias education is first understanding that everybody has a bias or biases. All of us do, right? It's part of human socialization, part of human development. It is normal. It is natural. The thing about biases, though, once we get past that and we're able to accept, yep, I have biases, right? I, Ariel, have biases. All of our panelists have biases, is understanding that biases are learned, which means they can be unlearned. And they're typically based on misinformation, stereotypes, and other things, again, that we internalize. So it often requires a lot of personal work. You know, we can look at individual biases that are really prevalent. Again, we can think about that manager, that supervisor who has somebody who's in a position of power, right? And when they execute their biases, that can have huge effects. But we can also think about institutional biases. So again, are there larger cultural pieces at a company that reinforce those biases? And we can see that showing up in lots of places. It's not just the active way in which we may be, you know, insulting somebody, right? Or, you know, kind of these stereotypical or overt examples we may think of. I would say the more sort of pervasive things are what's not there. And that's the covert piece, right? It's when we don't have workplace policies that reinforce the safety and well-being of folks. It's when we don't have insurance policies that we provide staff that are inclusive of their identities and accessing the care that they need, or the family structure opportunities that they want, and all those things. So it's a very holistic process to be able to work individually with staff, collectively with staff, but then also our job, and we're sort of like training wheels, right? We want to be able to leave that company feeling like they have the tools to continue that work. We're there to assist them afterwards, but we want them to feel empowered to continue to create that change systemically.
Right. You made some really good points about unconscious bias and all the different ways that it can pop up. You know, even job descriptions, as we frequently see, have traces of unconscious bias in them. So words like confident, decisive, strong, even outspoken, have been found to actually attract more male candidates and deter female candidates, which is unfortunate to see. So Katrina, how do you encourage companies to reevaluate their job descriptions?
Yeah, so this is my expertise. This is what 3 Years Media does all day, every day, is focus on the job posting, because traditionally this has been set up to create barriers, not to create access. And truly, if we are going to call ourselves inclusive workplaces, if we're going to call ourselves a place where people can belong, why wouldn't we start from the moment you look at a job? And so often it falls to gender first, right? push it through a gender decoder, and these are the boy words and the girl words, and you got too many boy words. And it's true, it will attract those genders. But again, we've erased an option. We've erased what attracts non-binary people. How does that work? And so really, when I coach teams and we do workshops on writing better job postings, when I talk about the context of bias, it's about digging into technique. And I won't go too much on my soapbox because I'm a giant nerd, but I did a 100-year research study of job postings because I believe that technique is part of the problem. And let me give you an example because the bias is deeper than the words. So years of experience. Let's say someone's looking for 15 years of experience in operations. Okay. 15 years of experience. Saying that means you want someone 15 years older, because I have yet to meet anyone who could tell me the difference between 13 and 15 years, or could tell me what you know at 12 that you don't know at 15. And because we're using that technique, all we're doing is creating different layered bias, and it goes so much past gendered language. And so really what I tell teams to do is you need to understand your technique and your how to get incredible clarity on what that job is, then use tools like a gender decoder to clean up. But big asterisks here. Do not create pipeline into a company where people can't belong and people are not thriving. Do the work in-house first with people like Ariel and other people who are really helping you build your culture of belonging before you start building a pipeline of belonging, because that is what I would call acceleration to failure.
Thank you so much. I have been blown away personally, and I'm sure our other panelists have seen it too, the amount of engagement that our audience is having. So thank you so much. Trying to keep up as we can with the comments and the questions, but really appreciate your listening. So that's always helpful. So I want to make sure that we do have time for questions. So we're going to wrap up our guided interview right now, but just kind of want to add and get to some concrete almost watch outs to help have some actionable items as you're walking away from this. So Katrina, I'm going to stay back with you for a minute here. Do you have any watch outs for unconscious bias during the actual interview process? And I apologize if you already touched upon this in your last answer.
No, you're perfect. Well, I actually think we need to go even one step back. So there's kind of two layers here. Go back to your hiring manager intake. And when you sit down with that manager, notice if they're using gendered language. We want a mailman, we want a trash man, he. I've been there. We've all been there, right? As a recruiter, as a talent leader, we have an incredible opportunity at that moment. Hey, do you know that you're using male pronouns every single time we talk about this person? Is that a requirement of the job? You know, throwing a little, is that right? Just asking the question without being confrontational, I find it really opens that door, because 9 times out of 10, and I would love Ariel's perspective on this too, it's like often I feel like I'm listening and they don't realize it, right? It's because our brains are moving so fast in our bias that we almost like zoom past the pronouns. And so then moving on to the interview, I actually want to talk about that introduction, because I have one addition that I use when I'm introducing myself, and I think it's very powerful for the interview. And so when I go into an interview, I say, hi, my name's Katrina. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the CEO. How should I refer to you? That last bit, I get an immediate understanding of where they're at on this spectrum of knowledge and understanding when it comes to pronouns. Because if I'm getting a blank look at that point, right, that's an education moment for me to talk to the candidate. Hey, have you heard of pronouns before? Let's talk. It also gives the opportunity for someone to decline. And we didn't talk about that, but you also have to make room for someone to not share, because it's not always safe. And you have to, like, we all have different backgrounds that bring us to this moment. And you don't know that someone is 100% ready to share with you who they are. That's
a really great point. I think the other thing outside, and so much of what I'm learning, right, and through listening, is it's beyond just words. It's also how you physically interact, whether it's, on camera, but eventually, hopefully we'll go back to some in person as well, making sure that you are making eye contact, not unintentionally staring or actually avoiding eye contact. So there's a lot that can be shown in unconscious bias simply through physical behavior that we might not even pay attention to. So, I loved your example as to how you introduce yourself, but also in terms of physical mannerisms, being more a little attentive of how we're approaching things. Now, Bob, do you have anything else to add? I know I just jumped in right there.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, look, I think what you've heard from Katrina today is right on point. Culture matters. I think there's a lot we can do to help inform a job description. But increasingly, candidates want to work in an environment where the company's culture is aligned with their way of thinking. That really matters today. And they're going to do research as a result. They're not going to stop at the job description. If they're not able to find evidence that your company embraces diversity and inclusivity, and they're likely to be less inclined to apply. That's just the way it's going to happen. So I think in the hiring process, we need to remember that. We need to really invest as leaders in ensuring that our culture does reflect diversity and inclusion. We all have work to do in that regard. There are very few companies that have gotten to where they should be as it relates to diversity. We can acknowledge that, right, and not be afraid of it. We can step into it. We can work with our teams to embrace it. And in doing so, you are by extension making people feel more welcome, whether they are a part of the community or an ally to the community. It helps them to remember that this is a company that is working hard to embrace diversity and embrace inclusion. In the hiring process, we also have to remember, as I said earlier, that we're all from different backgrounds. We have not been all offered the same opportunities in our career as a result of sometimes being from a minority group. And so they may not have the same credentials on their resume as another candidate, right? It doesn't mean that they aren't as capable of doing the job. And we really have to rethink, what are we doing here? How are we qualifying a candidate before we even bring them into the interview process, right? For just a small example that I know a lot of companies are rethinking is whether or not someone should have that college degree. Is that critical to performing in their job? Can a candidate who has the experience rather than the diploma be as qualified? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves as hiring managers in this industry to ensure that we are level setting and getting candidates from all different diverse backgrounds to apply to the job.
I got to touch on that college degree thing. And Megan, you knew that was coming, right?
I did.
So here's the deal on college degree. I talk about it almost every day, if not multiple times a day, because I work with these highly talented robotics engineers and software engineers, and they insist on the degree. And then I ask, do you have the degree you're requiring? And they say no. And so we have to have a mirror moment here. I got to get on the soapbox. College is a privilege, not a right. Okay. And I can say I was very privileged at a very young age to have my life end up that I went to college. I feel very, very blessed for that. But I was blessed. I was extremely, extremely lucky. And the fact that we use that as a condition to get people into work is not right. It's not right. Because I don't know about any of you, but I'm now, I'm going to age myself. I'm like 15 years out of college and plus or minus, and I don't use anything I learned in school, not one. I have not done a billboard recently. I have not used the P's of marketing, and I run a whole ass company. All right. So the fact that we're going to hold that as a barrier for other people, it's not right. Like, it's just not right unless they are licensed and they are my doctor, or there's something that they have to regularly license to even do their job. I don't even want to talk about degrees.
And I want to jump on that soapbox too, Katrina. Hopefully there's some room on the soapbox, because I want to connect the thread, right, to the topic we're talking about here today around LGBTQ plus identity, around pride, all of that. If we really want to connect the thread, we also have to understand, and Bob, I think you were getting to this as well, right, is not only who has had access to college, but why haven't they had access to college? So if we're thinking about queer and trans people, and especially queer and trans people of color, we're thinking about folks who oftentimes were bullied in school, which means paying attention every day, going to class every day when your peers are harassing you, or when your own teacher is being harmful towards you, or when your family is rejecting you and you're ending up in the foster care system, right? All of these are things that are hindrances to achieving permanency and to thriving. Doesn't mean it's impossible, right? But it absolutely is a hindrance to folks accessing college. So again, if we are going to say, and let's also just name, right, that DEI efforts, while they've been around forever, the resurgence of DEI has emerged through the lens of Black Lives Matter. So let's also just name that piece. Is that if we are truly committed to DEI, then we have to also look at those bigger historical contexts. And we can't just say, we're going to put a policy in place, we're going to have a training, we're going to put some posters on the wall. It really is saying, as you're saying, Katrina and Bob, let's look at these practices we have. Are they necessary? Who are they excluding? And again, bottom line, we can also think about, if you really just want to focus on your company, and if that's the angle, because hey, sometimes that's the angle that's going to get you in, right? So let's be strategic in the way we do the advocacy. It's better for your company at the end of the day, because that means you're missing out on talent that could otherwise be an asset to your company. And like you said, Bob, I mean, I can't quote the study off the top of my head, but if anybody wants it, I'm happy to find it for you. But increasingly, the sort of employee market is looking at that. There's a very astute generation of folks who aren't just going to go blindly apply to an organization. They're going to go look at social media. They're going to go look at Glassdoor and Monster and all these things, right? And they're going to want to know, what is the experience at that company? Especially if you say that you're about something, I want to see the proof in the pudding.
Yes.
That's a really great point. And you know, I would say, just to add to that, fortunately or unfortunately, I think companies are increasingly, I would probably say fortunately, being forced to look beyond something like a diploma, because there simply there's too big a gap in supply and demand for qualified candidates. There was a question asked that I just noticed. So what is recommended to offer balance? You know, if you shouldn't look at the degree, what you should look at? Listen, this is about work. This is about digging in and understanding what their skills are and trying to translate that into this role. That means, to Katrina's earlier point, that you need to, if you're a recruiter, work with the hiring manager to understand what is truly critical for this role to be successful. And then you need to work with the candidates to understand whether or not they have those skills. It is more work, but if we do the work, we're going to close the gap, right? That's the thing, folks. We have a huge gap between supply and demand of skilled candidates. And the truth is, there are probably plenty of people out there in minority groups, not only LGBTQ+, but also others that have the skills that can do these jobs. And we need to do the work to demonstrate whether or not they're qualified and ready to take that next step.
Yes, and with 15 minutes left, I want to jump into the questions. Sorry. Ariel, there's actually one that you were going to answer here. Lisa would like to know your thoughts on redacting all personal identifiers on resumes.
I love this. I respond very quickly and enthusiastically, yes. And I think, Katrina, you were kind of speaking to some of this as well. All identifiers. So in all transparency, my organization, for example, when I'm hiring, I get all the resumes directly. However, when I pass them along to folks who are going to join me in the hiring process, I remove name. If there's pronouns, I remove pronouns. I remove the school and the year of graduation. if that was included, which in the state of California, for example, is actually something that we shouldn't be taking into account because we can, again, consciously or unconsciously start to put together age and things like that. But I remove school and I go through again and I look for different things like that. Something that Katrina was speaking to that also made me think of, and as you were talking about sort of the skills, the qualifications, I also, and I learned this particular technique from an organization called the Management Center, and they have incredible resources as far as, a variety of things, supervision and things like that, but also hiring. I list out, what do I need for this job? What do you have to be able to do? Immediately coming in day one. And then I go to, what would I want? What is my list? What are a few things that would be on my wish list? But I try to differentiate those things. And I try to avoid, again, some of those things that may be traditionally gendered. I need somebody who is confident. I need somebody who's right. So we can think about those qualities, but in a way that are more neutral and in a way that are more, that are less subjective, right? And especially because, for example, I'm hiring people, I need people on my team who can also do public speaking, who can also sit in a room with a line staff member at a government agency who's been there for 20 plus years and is like, I don't know about this stuff. I've been doing this the way I've done it. And I also need somebody who can be really charismatic in front of a group. So I try to think about, well, what does it take to be those things rather than who is the person who has those qualities?
Yeah. And so I just shared in the chat my hiring manager intake, because what it does is it forces you to imagine the work. And that's often where bias creeps in, is we imagine a wish list. I joke and I'll be like, oh, this sounds like a rich kid's wish list. Like, y'all want a pony, you want a rainbow, and not your example, but I'm just saying it broadly, right? And I start reading all.
We want the unicorn, right? We're always looking for the unicorn.
Yeah. But truly what we have to do is understand what they do every day. Understand what 6 months, if they did a great job, what happens in 6 months that's not happening right now? And starting to put that language and having such incredible clarity that I could walk up to a stranger on the street and they could read it and go, oh no, I don't want to do this, right? That's the level of clarity that I aspire to if you truly want to remove that bias from the post and get all types of people to respond.
I have a question, Katrina, Bob, this might go to either of you, but other than gendered language in a job description, do you have any tips on anything to add that says that we have an inclusive culture? Or even on our website, how do we show to job seekers that we embrace diversity and are actively seeking it?
I can tell you that little line that says minority/veteran/disability/LGBT, ain't it? Right? Like, can we please stop with the stamps and the nice to haves? I personally, I think that if you're going to call it out, you should have a dedicated page on your website and you should direct other people to that page. Number two, I think is, as far as in the actual job description, this is a great opportunity for video. So video is an incredible way to show versus tell, right? To make sure that people can see what it means to belong instead of just preaching the same stuff that everyone else is saying.
That's a really good point. Actually, Bob, I think you were going to say something.
I was going to add to what was said. As it was just said, it's not enough to put a few words on the job post. It's a good place to start. I would agree with that, but it really is about demonstrating your company's culture on your website and living your culture with your team, right? The truth is, like I said earlier, there's very few companies that are there. Acknowledge it, work with your leaders, work with your employees. Don't be afraid to embrace the fact that there's a gap in diversity within your organization. It's true for most organizations. We're just not where we should be. We're having a reckoning on that, but you can't change it if you don't lean into it, if you don't accept it and try to work through it. So demonstrating your culture through your website really matters, and living your culture matters most of all, because your best source of great candidates are your own employees. If they believe that your company is focusing on diversity and inclusion, if they're prideful in that, pardon the pun, then they are going to let their friends and colleagues know that if, hey, you're looking for a job, you really should check out my company, because we're working hard to be inclusive and to focus on diversity. We're not there yet, but we're working at it. That's what candidates want to hear.
I'm going to do a rare monster plug. Normally, I like to keep these things at the higher level, but as you know, this is part of our DEI series here. And one of the things that I've learned recently is in a webinar about employer branding and Monster Strategic Talent Solutions is that diversity can't be an add-on. To Katrina's point, to Bob's point, it can't just be a line, right? So as you're thinking about your employer brand, you're thinking about your EVP, diversity can't just be one spoke in the wheel. Like, you need to live this as a culture. And while I love the idea of adding, having a dedicated page to it, it needs to be more than a checkbox. And I think Katrina and I have talked about this all the time, right? It's not just checking a box and you moving on. This needs to be part of as who you are and what you represent. So I've really loved learning about that through our webinar series.
And Megan, if I can build on that piece as well, right? And I think, again, Bob, Katrina, you're getting to this. I would actually say, please do not start just adding pronouns to your signature, to your business cards, to whatever, if you do not have the practices in place. It is actually more harmful for you to try to advertise to your own employees, prospective employees, clientele, whatever, that you are something, and then have those folks come into your space and not be safe and not be protected. So we are doing a disservice if we don't do, as you were saying, Katrina, that work on the inside as well. So it's not, yes, the web pages, all those things, the visibility are great. And I think somebody kind of asked this question as well, or there was some iteration of it. One thing that we can also be doing is in our onboarding, right? We all have different onboarding procedures. So again, do we have a policy around people being able to go by their affirmed name and pronouns? And if so, which hopefully we do, or we are working on that, do we talk about that and the importance of that as a part of our culture at a company in the onboarding? Do we have even if it's a short section in the onboarding about pronouns so people understand, because it may, again, be a newer concept. So how are we institutionalizing these things and not just slapping a bunch of rainbow stickers on things and saying, we did it, we're great, we did the thing, we're inclusive now?
Yep.
Can I add a point on that? Sorry. I just wanted to say, mispronouncing someone's name is considered disrespectful, right? If you consistently mispronounce their name, I should say. The same is true for pronouns.
I mean, if I got your name wrong, right, Bob? If I called you Rob, right?
I would correct you, right? Absolutely. Say, and if you called me Rob bad. 3 or 4 times, I would start to wonder, I wonder why Ariel does not want to call me by my proper name. It's just, to me, it's the smallest thing we can do. It's the smallest thing we could do. Because it's so easy. It's so simple. Just to demonstrate that we are inclusive is to call folks by their proper pronoun and to make sure that they feel comfortable in that. And, to another point that you were making, Katrina, in the apply process, let's make sure that our forms have the ability to adjust the pronouns, right? I mean, I'll tell you, as a gay dad, I was just filling out summer camp applications for my daughter in the last month. And I cannot tell you, every single one of them asks for the mother and the father. That's a part of the form.
It's not necessary for so many reasons.
Right. Now, I do understand that in our market, a lot of ATSs are the application tracking systems have those fields standardized. And so it's not necessarily in the employer's control. Here's what I'd say. File a ticket.
Yeah.
Put in a request.
Update your data systems, y'all, please.
Yeah.
I actually wrote an entire blog on that for ATSs who might be looking for that. Info. Yeah, I'll teach you how. I'll give you the list. I'll show you the drop down, because it happened for me because I had an event organizer ask me, hey, Katrina, how do we make sure we respect you? And I was like, can I register correctly? That would be amazing. And that simple step made me feel so accepted when really, they could have ignored me. And so often I have to say, like, I will correct you if you mess up someone else's pronouns, but I won't correct you if you mess up mine. Right? I can be such a fierce defender. So even me, someone who is standing in front of you, teaching you about pronouns has fear. Imagine what someone who's just coming out feels. Our goal is to make them feel safe. We have an opportunity. The Trevor Project just did a research study that said if one person at work recognizes your pronouns, that reduces the likelihood that you'll attempt suicide by 40%. 40. So you can be the one. You joined this webinar. You want to be better? Do that. That can be life-saving for someone else. And what better way to feel like you have done your work and you've truly influenced someone else's life than to respect, to make them feel safe, and then to potentially be able to save their life. That's huge. I'm sorry. We don't get that opportunity every day.
Well said. Well said.
A very powerful stat. A lot of positive responses in the chats here. Ariel, there's something.
Oh yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, there was something. Sorry, you go.
Because again, we're talking about what can we actively be doing. I think somebody else also asked that specifically in the job description and job advertisement, for example. I've seen some wonderful job descriptions that don't just say, here's our non-discrimination that we have to legally post this little snippet at the end. But to put something in there, we highly encourage candidates of color. We highly encourage LGBTQ plus people, right? Again, you're taking an active step in saying we recognize that there is diversity. We also recognize that there may be folks who look at our job description or look at our company and may be wondering about the safety and inclusion of that organization. So when I see a job description like that, that piques my interest as well.
Yeah, what I wanted to say very much dovetails on that. It's a tip for recruiters, is just be prepared to explain how your workplace is LGBTQ plus friendly. Be prepared. Reach out to HR. Just don't say the statement and then walk away from it and then not know how to back it up. Learn what your policies are that are in place to prevent discrimination and also provide a supportive environment. It's not just one or the other. They're both, right? It's going back to the title of this, is building a sense of belonging. So you should be prepared to answer this question. And also, if you are not satisfied, I'm pounding on my desk here. If you are not satisfied with what you're hearing, figure out how you can influence them. How can you improve them? It doesn't need to be okay, and this is it. We're always listening. We're always learning, and also training. So I just kind of want to end this here as we're coming up to it. I just want to make sure that no one there is missing out on qualified candidates. So any tips on how to make sure that you're not missing out on someone who could be the perfect person for the role?
Yeah. Train early, create clarity in your job postings that, I'm not kidding, stranger on the street. You need no expertise to understand the role. Genuinely, I feel like if every person on this call practiced pronouns, right? Did the practice even when you mess up, it's they, moving on, right? And I think going in to get that level of clarity, that is again, so clear that a stranger could understand what this person does every day and give me language about what they do. If you could do those two things, I think you can really start to move the needle.
Right. I think it's tough for recruiters sometimes. Katrina, I'm sure you deal with this in your work. They feel a little stuck between a rock and a hard place, meaning the hiring manager, right, is pushing them hard to get that resume in there. What would you say, how can, because I know there's a lot of recruiters that are listening in, how would you address that issue, or how would you help them to address that issue with the hiring managers if they feel like they get pushback at wanting to, consider a wider group of potential candidates?
In my experience, it's often them trying to narrow, right? They're adding very unique licenses or this, that, and the other thing. And the hiring manager is like pushing so hard to narrow, and the recruiter's trying to get that bigger pipeline. I think that's what you're asking. And how does the recruiter tell the hiring manager that? And the story that the language that I use in that scenario is, I tell them, We need to post the role that the right person knows they can do the work. The more barriers we add, the more bias we add. And that's not our goal. It's to get the right people to apply. Do you want to look at, and every recruiter on this call is about to nod your head. Do you want to look at 10,000 resumes, or do you want to look at 1,000 that are very, very qualified? I know what the answer is, right? And we can get to that when we get to clarity, truly, because there's a imbalance for candidates. We candidates, and every single person on this call, you're a liar if you say you've never been a candidate, right? Every single person knows if they have read a job posting, there's been a misunderstanding. And so if we could just eliminate that misunderstanding, I don't know what collaboration means. I don't know what team player means at your company, whatever that is. If we can remove some of that, we meet them in the middle and just get the work right. And if we can get that right, we start to remove the biases that have stopped us from hiring diverse people for over 100 years.
Ariel, any final thoughts?
I mean, I think Bob, Katrina kind of, somebody said as well, drop the mic there. Again, I would just encourage folks to think about the way institutionally you're doing your work and start there and challenge the status quo. If there's a mentality, well, the reason we do this because we've always done this, well, does it have to be done that way? Again, do we absolutely, do we need that degree or not? But whatever that institutional example is, right? Just because we've done it that way doesn't mean that we have to continue doing it that way. And if we want to succeed, if we want to bring in folks that are highly talented, who are going to be amazing employees, who are going to do good work, then we have to start removing those institutional barriers. So go back, look at your policies, look at also your practices, because just because we have it in writing does not mean that it actually lives and breathes in reality. So also think about, how does that policy exist in real time? And then you can start looking at a lot of those external things, and then you can start looking at training and coaching and really sort of bringing in your workforce to that process. But again, I like for folks, you can do it in tandem, you can absolutely have parallel processes, but to really encourage them to start looking at those things and looking also what does your own staffing look like? Who's in leadership, right? Who do you have folks who reflect the diversity of your workforce and also of your clientele? So those are the two big things I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're already a few minutes over, so I appreciate all of you hanging around with us. Amazing. We still have over 1,000 people still on the call here. So thank you again for attending Monsters webinar on conscious bias. We really appreciate you being such an engaged audience. We tried to get to as many questions as possible, but thank you so much for submitting them. As I mentioned in the chat, tomorrow we will send around a recording of this webinar as well as links, so you can continue the conversation if you choose to with our wonderful panelists. And of course, thank you to our wonderful panelists for your time and your expertise today. We hope that everyone can end today's session a little bit more enlightened and conscious of their recruiting efforts. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
And happy Pride.